So regrets. It's not often I have them, but unfortunately, I certainly do when it comes to the AMD Ryzen 7950X 3D. And that's probably a bold statement, and you've probably seen other YouTube creators go through the process of reviewing this CPU with very mixed results. I've seen some that absolutely say it's mind-boggling, it's fantastic, it blows everything out the water. Then I've seen other creators that have mentioned how indifferent the results they've had. Now, I kind of sit on that kind of boat in between. There are absolutely many perks to having the CPU, and there are many for not. Now, in reality, I moved from an AMD 5800X3D, which is probably known as the best budget gaming CPU out there. So you're probably thinking, why did I do it? Now, I'll be honest, I don't just use my PC for gaming. I obviously use it for content creation. And what I was finding is the 5800X3D was just lagging behind a little bit when it comes to stuff like handbrake conversions, video editing, that kind of thing. Even though there is a reliance and a lot of encoding done via the GPU itself, obviously the CPU does play a massive part in that with addressable commands, various other options with basically running the software itself. And also the memory plays a massive part in those kind of conversions and elements that need to happen. Now, in reality, the idea of this upgrade was I had a couple of options. One was to completely go away from AMD and move to Intel on the 1300, which price point wise, you can get a little bit cheaper than this AMD. Or I could make the jump from AM4 to AM5, which is what I decided to do. So I suppose the question is, why do I regret it? Now, I don't completely regret it. I need to be very honest with that. This CPU is amazing. However, I say that with very bated breath. A lot of this CPU relies on software development because the dies on this and the kind of offset that it does to unlock that 3D cache relies on optimization within the games. It also, obviously, if any kind of applications ever wanted to use it, requires that optimization. Now, I'm probably lucky that I'm reviewing this a lot later on than the original YouTubers would have done it, because realistically, they'd have probably been doing it at launch because they'd have been sent one, and they would have had probably very indifferent results. This isn't a CPU for somebody who just wants to plug and play. There are definitely requirements that need to be installed with this, which we'll go over in a short while, and you do need to do a little bit of fine tweaking. There is also some other challenges with AM5 at the moment. So I've got the 6700 series, and I'll be honest, it takes a lifetime to post. Now, I haven't got to the full bottom of the problem at the moment, but I believe it's to do with the memory checking that goes on, and we're probably all in that boat awaiting a BIOS update to solve that challenge. What it means is that my PC doesn't boot in seconds now, it probably takes around 30. That's not a massive problem because realistically the moment it has actually posted, it does almost boot instantaneous. Now, what I've done with this CPU is I've tested it against the 5800. Now, I've done this realistically only in one way. I've kind of done it on 3D Mark. I have done some other tests as well, so I've done a couple of Geekbench comparisons, but I've also kind of looked at it from a real world point of view, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit. However, sit back, enjoy what I'm about to show you, because this little thing is a little bit more complicated than it looks. Okay, so let's talk about some of the synthetic benchmarking tests that I've already run. I've got them over here as just simple PNGs that I've previously run, which will give you a comparison. So these are obviously taken at 2 points in time, prior to and after the upgrade. So this one is the standard time spy in 3D Mark. And this is where it gets quite interesting. This is what I mean about this CPU and some of the weird anomalies you get. So you'll see here that pretty much obviously the 3D Mark score is up, which you'd fully expect because we've got a lot more on that CPU. You know, you've got a 44.5% increase there. The graphics test, however, Seems to be a bit all over the place there. So not quite sure what was run on graphics test 1 that may have done that. There are obviously variables within a PC that can cause these challenges, so I'm not going to read too much into that. However, when we start looking at some of the other stuff, you'll kind of understand why a little bit. So let's open the next one, which is the CPU score, which is obvious. You know, you'd fully expect this one to outperform. So this is the main reason why I did this upgrade. So gaming aside, where this is a massive benefit is over obviously the core count and the thread count being 16 threads. 16 cores and 32 threads on the Ryzen 9 compared to, I think it was something like 8 and 16 on the 5800 is a massive benefit, particularly for stuff that involves you know, sort of compute power, any kind of translation, or, you know, encoding, decoding, zipping, handbrake, those kind of things. Anything that involves actually stressing the CPU out a little bit more is why I went for the CPU. So from that perspective, absolutely, it's kind of done what I wanted it to achieve. But when it comes back to gaming, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. Unfortunately, I don't have some of the stock footage that I had previously on the 5800 to kind of show you how it was running. The primary difference between the two, and I'll kind of talk about what I used for the benchmarks in a moment. But I don't have some of those to hand, but I can probably relate what they were looking at previously. Now, this is interesting. So when you do times by extreme, which is pretty much the kind of test I would like to do, because this is looking at 4K and I like to game in 4K where possible, you can see, you know, a good 8% roughly on average increase. Obviously the CPU, we're seeing a hell of a lot of change there. But realistically, obviously, what it can impact positively is those. And obviously, having DDR5 is going to help some of this as well. It's because memory is going to be quicker to be addressed, etc. Coming on to Speedway, which I suppose is the most recent test that 3D Mark have. Again, you can see some improvements, but not a massive amount. So I suppose the question is, if you were going to buy this just for gaming, is this the right choice? Is this the kind of solution, you know, the jump in price as well, to have it? Well, let's delve in and actually do a benchmark on a game just to kind of see how that looks. And what I will be able to do is kind of tell you how it was previously. Unfortunately, I don't have the comparison footage anymore, but I can at least give you my real world view of what I've noticed the differences are. So now for a segue to our sponsor, Octomosh Apparel and Beyonce.
Thank you so much.
Oh, hello.
It means so much to me, especially coming from y'all.
So let's have a quick look at Octomosh Apparel, based in Cambridgeshire in the UK. They do a wonderful selection of printed work from the deranged and maybe slightly strange mind of Ed. So why not go visit their Etsy store right now? The link is in the description, as is their Facebook and Instagram pages. So let's run a benchmarking test inside Ryzen 0 Dawn. I will turn everything up to ultimate, as you can see. So you can see obviously the 1% lows, etc. Let's just now run a benchmark and see how this kind of looks from that perspective, and then kind of look where we're at. So you can get a bit of an idea. What we've got is, because this has two GPUs, because obviously the AMD itself has an APU inside it, I have to set it to GPU 2, which is my NVIDIA. So it's the 4080. So you get a bit of an idea of the current CPU temperature, the watt is drawing, also the RAM usage. Now I do have 64 gig in here, so you can kind of see what that's pulling, and you can see obviously temperatures of the GPU, etc. Now, interestingly, the frames per second is a good indication. Now, when I run this previously, I was averaging around about the 95 mark on the 5800. I will say though that the TDP, so the actual CPU power draw, felt a little bit higher. So was the graphics. I tend to found that the graphics were pulling about 300 watts when doing this. So not quite sure where the offloading's happening, but you do get a bit of an idea. Looking at the average frame rate, we're looking at about 107. Now this is on ultimate quality, so this is absolutely throwing everything at this. The good thing is, you also got the 57 frames per second as your 1% lows. But yeah, very, very, very smooth. I remember running this some time ago when I had a 3090, and I certainly wasn't getting anywhere near this kind of level of performance. Certainly what I was getting was around 400-500 watts from the GPU. So this is probably where this Ryzen and also this GPU that I'm running, the 4800, really excel, is actually on their, sort of power efficiency against performance. Certainly if we were running a Intel in here, I'd expect that CPU to be a lot higher wattage wise. It's also running at 70 degrees C. Now I will say I'm running my all-in-one on quiet. When I mean quiet, every fan apart from the pump is set at around 900 rather than anything higher. Now the reason I've got it set that kind of RPM speed is because it's quiet. You can't hear it on my mic, I can't hear it in my ears. I can have it ramp up and that CPU temp would probably drop significantly, but why would I want to do that when it's adamantly performing? I think this is rated up to I think about 80-90 I think centigrade, so it's not thermal throttling from what I can see. I can certainly pull out HW info in a while to see what's happening, but yeah, it's performing admirably, this. So you can see the average slightly disagrees with mine. I got 104. It believes I got about 100. The max you can see there, frames per second, 251. You can see pretty much everything else I'm running at that there as well. So absolutely stomps all over that. So, really good. I've obviously kept off VSync. I didn't put HDR rendering on. So after that, we're going to have a quick look at Cyberpunk. And again, I'm just running the benchmark. Now, all benchmarks that I run are always at 4K. I know that's probably not standard. Most people like to run them at 1080p. But as I game in 4K, it seems wrong for me not to actually kind of do true to life benchmarking from that respect. Now, Cyberpunk obviously is one of those that the more you fiddle with it, the better you can potentially get it. All I've enabled at the moment is ray tracing is on with this. I think there is some DLSS as well enabled. So to kind of get the 58, 60 odd frames per second on this is probably more than acceptable. I could absolutely tweak these. Now, when I've run this previously with the other CPU, I was kind of averaging kind of low 50s, probably high 40s. So there is a little bit of a difference. Again, a bit of a strange one, because if you actually look at the CPU itself, it's not being overworked. But what a fantastic game to run this with. Obviously had a very bad release. There is a new content out later this month, I think, which will probably push it a lot further. So there's a kind of overview of what I ran it as, so you kind of get an idea, but it'd be more than playable at that kind of spec. And indeed, I could obviously drop the resolution down and change off some ray tracing, etc. So if we carry on and look at some of the tests I run on Cinebench, for example, you can see this is what I was getting at regarding. This is single core, so we need to bear this in mind, and you'll see a very different view of this when we look at the multi-core. But you can see quite clearly the actual step for single core processing isn't massive from the 5800. That being said, this obviously with probably explain some of the reasons around some of the weird performance that we're getting with games, etc., because you tend to find certain games won't necessarily be optimized for multi-core. So that might explain some parts of it. However, if we flick over to multi-core, for example, this is where it really, really blows the 5800 out of the water. Now, if you look at that, that's obviously I've not got any i7s to compare at the moment, but that kind of performance level, I mean, look, it's outperforming the Apple M1 Ultra chip, which everybody knows was really well optimized. And obviously, look at the kind of jump it's got from a Threadripper, which is that one's a 32-core, 64-thread processor, albeit it's older technology. But that kind of goes to show where the actual multi-core side of it is beneficial. So just something to bear in mind. So you set out at the start of this video and said, I regret this purchase. And I suppose in realistic terms, I do. And I do for a couple of reasons. One is, why didn't I do it sooner? I do that very tongue-in-cheek. What I really mean is, what I regret is not waiting. Realistically, I sold my 5800 X3D for around £250. So if you think of the actual budget performance ratio for that CPU, that's absolutely outstanding. This CPU cost £700. So is the uplift between the two of those worth that additional money? For gaming, absolutely not. The kind of variables you see are very indifferent. It really does depend massively on what setup you've got, what game you're running. We certainly did see some kind of increases, or you will see some increases of about 10%, which is massive. Let's be honest, that's quite a significant jump. However, we will see others that kind of look like they're not as performing as well as the 5800, which does seem ludicrous as well. But realistically, that is just because of optimization within that game. Why I actually am happy with this purchase, though, is the flip side of this. So it's actually, one, the power consumption. If I did go to a i7 13th gen CPU, albeit it would have been a little bit cheaper, that would have certainly not idled at less, because obviously Intels tend to idle a lot better. But when it comes to peak performance, it would not meet or match up to the Ryzen counterpart. They tend to go very, very power hungry and very, very heat hungry. This, because obviously they've dropped the heat consumption and thermal limit because of the 3D cache layer with the CCD die, I believe it's called. It does perform a lot better under thermal conditions. It doesn't tend to thermal throttle as much from what I can see, and it runs very smoothly. Now the flip side of this is obviously if you're not using it for gaming and you're using it for production or productivity, my God, this thing is insane. You could go and get the non-3D cache version, absolutely. But why I opted for this was mainly about that drop in power. So the fact that the TDP is limited a little bit more, and it tends to be more energy efficient. So this day and age where energy should be on everybody's minds about how much you're consuming, this is why I went for that. Now, it did cost me a bit extra, and I didn't get my free copy of Starfield with it, which is really unfortunate. But I know damn well that over time, like the 5800 did, this will only get better. So I regret it for two reasons. I regret it for not buying it sooner, but I also regret potentially not waiting, because I'll be honest, if you've got a very happy setup now, for gaming, there is no real need to change today. However, if you're already using something like a 5800 and you want to improve other stuff like your productivity, your 7-zips, your Cinebench marks, those kind of things, absolutely just drop that wad on it and go and get it. Hopefully you've liked this very unbiased review of the product. Like I said, it was bought with my own money. I am, or tend to be, a bit of an AMD fan, although be it, I do have 12th gen Intel NUC in the building, which is, again, a very, very nice difference with its efficiency and performance cores. But this is probably the future. And also the benefit of DDR5, let's not overlook that. Albeit it's more money than I wanted to throw down on an upgrade, because obviously there's the motherboard and the Memory had to be updated as well, and let's be honest, I've now got a PCIe 5 slot, so I'm going to have to at some point put in a new NVMe drive just to get the best out of that. But I'm not completely disappointed, and it's not often I say that, but let's think, from a cost to performance, for gaming, it's probably not worth it at the moment. But if you're looking for productivity, it's 100% worth it. So if you have liked it, hit the like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.